Support for This News is So Gay comes from the LGBTQ Opportunity Fund of the Cleveland Foundation, leveraging philanthropy to empower LGBTQ communities. Welcome to This News is So Gay. I'm your host, Ken Schneck, editor of the Buckeye Flame, Ohio's LGBTQ newsroom. Thanks so much for joining us. A new Trump administration executive order on homelessness is causing a ton of concern in the LGBTQ community. What is the reason for this alarm? Southern HIV and AIDS Awareness Day just passed. Why is that day necessary? We're going to find out. Bans. Where are the latest bans on LGBTQ public life? And there are quite a few. And finally, our Queer Joy segment has a name. But more importantly, we're going to actually ask, where are my colleagues finding Queer Joy in the news this week? Joining us to answer all of those questions and so many more, reporter for the 19th, an independent nonprofit newsroom reporting on gender, politics, policy, and power, Candice Norwood. Candice, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
I'm tempted to make you talk for 45 minutes on your new 3-year strategic plan, but I'm not going to make you do that, Candice.
Bless you.
Director of local news for the United States South for GLAAD, the nonprofit organization focused on LGBTQ advocacy and cultural change, Darian. Darian, welcome.
Hey, Ken, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be with you all today.
And from the Philadelphia Gay News, and an original member from the pilot of This News is So Gay in 2022. And I will never not highlight that. Jason Villemez. Jason, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Ken. We've come a long way since our days of tin cans and string.
And yet, not that far. Well, our LGBTQ Reporters Roundtable is now assembled, so let's dive in. A few weeks ago, we talked about a class action lawsuit filed by nearly 300 incarcerated trans women and men who have sued the state of Georgia's corrections officials, challenging the law that prevents them from receiving gender-affirming medical care. Candice, I need to just be upfront with you from the start of this show. We were talking about you behind your back. We were praising this reporting. We actually paused in the show to say, we all love Candice's reporting, but it actually was your piece. Can you talk to us about putting that piece together and what you learned?
Absolutely. It was pretty straightforward. I was contacted by the Center for Constitutional Rights, which is a national legal organization that brought this lawsuit. And I had previously worked with them a couple years ago regarding the case of Ashley Diamond, a Black trans woman who sued the Department of Corrections in Georgia twice, once in 2015 and then at the end of 2022. And at that time, she said that over periods of incarceration, she was sexually assaulted multiple times and was denied hormone treatment. And so there are a number of reasons I thought this was important to cover. But one I want to note is that Ashley's first lawsuit in 2015 stipulated certain changes by the Georgia Department of Corrections that were in theory supposed to make treatment of incarcerated trans people better. 7 years later, she had to sue again. And now 10 years later, we have this law in Georgia that is effectively making incarcerated trans people detransition in prisons.
One of the conversations that this set off a few weeks ago, in addition to just talking about Candice behind her back, but one of the conversations that it set off was about media coverage, certainly media coverage of incarcerated trans individuals, but also just generally media coverage of trans voices. And indeed, GLAAD recently put out some research on this coverage, specifically in your region, Darian. What did you all discover there at GLAAD?
Thank you so much for that question, Ken. But before I tell you what we discovered in our analysis of the Georgia newsrooms, I just want to really commend Candice for covering the trans inmate story here in Georgia and really elevating that story into the national conversation. Really important work. But to answer your question, Ken, on August 12th, GLAAD released an analysis of transgender coverage from 7 of the top news outlets during the most recent legislative session. question. And what we found was that out of 95 stories, only 25 included a quote from a transgender person, and only 9 of the 95 stories included professionals with experience on the topic. Now, as Candice and others already know, 3 anti-LGBTQ bills were passed in Georgia during the most recent legislative session. And what we see happening so often at GLAAD is that reporters are telling trans stories, but they are not including trans voices in their coverage, despite trans folks being the most impacted by anti-trans legislation. And another critical piece was context was repeatedly missing from trans stories in the largest outlet in the Southeast, such as the fact that every major medical association supports necessary medical care for trans people, or that the same treatments being banned for trans youth have been prescribed for decades to cis people and youth. But there is a bright spot. On the flip side, independent newsrooms like the Georgia Recorder are doing a masterful job of telling our stories accurately and including trans voices. So it was a mixed bag overall, but there is still much work to be done in making sure that the coverage is fair, accurate, and inclusive.
So much more work to be done. Thank you both for that. At the end of July, President Trump issued an executive order that is raising concerns in the LGBTQ plus community, specifically around homelessness. Jason, before we talk about the reverberations, including right where you are geographically, can you walk us through the executive order that was entitled Ending Crime and Disorder on America's Streets?
First, I think we need to get out there that this executive order is basically wanting to punish people for being homeless and punish people for having mental illness. The Trump administration uses a lot of word salad in these executive orders. And the more I talk about it, I think the more it's going to be confusing and vague. So let's put that out there first. They're not trying to help homeless people at all here. The executive order basically directs the attorney general to try and reverse precedents that make it difficult to commit homeless people and commit people with mental illness. It directs her to assist local and state governments to do that. It directs her to aid in removing encampments, and it directs an increase in mental health courts and drug courts to facilitate that process. And this executive order uses mental illness very liberally. It also uses the term who pose a danger to others very liberally. So this is important to know when we get to the second question.
It's almost like you know what the next question is going to be, because I know that this is raising alarm in Philadelphia, as it is in many other cities. What specifically is causing concern there?
So we have about 5,200 homeless people in Philadelphia as of last year. At any point, it could rise or fall as people find transitory housing. But generally, it's around 5,000 people, 5,200 people. And as we know, rates of homelessness among LGBTQ people are higher than the general population, the cisgender counterparts we have. The Trevor Project reported that 28% of LGBTQ youth have experienced homelessness in their life. The Williams Institute reports that 8% of trans people have experienced homelessness recently, as opposed to 1% of cisgender straight people. So in Philadelphia, people are obviously worried that this executive order is not only going to punish them for being homeless, but punish them for being LGBTQ. One part the EO also states is that people who receive federal funding for homeless services have to report to the federal government health-related information. And I put that in quotations because that is completely vague. It could include anything, really, your sexuality, drug use, your race. And so people in Philly are really concerned because this administration, as we have seen on the news and seen the video of people removing tent cities, removing homeless encampments, this administration will do anything to get its goals across. And its goals really are to punish people who disagree with it and to punish people who are, unfortunately, part of the LGBTQ community.
Yeah. And in our ever-present attempt to add, we always want to add intersectionality and complexity to these topics. Candice, there was reporting from the 19th News Network, of which the Buckeye Flame is also a proud member. There was reporting about some pretty alarming numbers in California regarding women experiencing homelessness. Can you talk to us about what's going on there?
Yeah, so this was a story we republished by the LA Public Press in March, examining how domestic violence drives homelessness in Los Angeles. And the story was focused on women without noting LGBTQ plus status. But I do want to note that data indicates that domestic violence is also a big driver of homelessness for queer and trans people as well. And so, back to this particular report, among the data it cites, it says that 4,000 homeless people who have fled domestic violence are having to find shelter in 17 shelters only in the city, and with just under 600 shelter beds. And many of these survivors have challenges being approved for housing because of credit scores or financial instability. They have trouble with getting childcare support. Many immigrants who are survivors are afraid to seek out resources because of their immigration status. And some also opt to live on the streets instead of a shelter because they are fearful and feel unsafe when they are in shelters. So that's just a brief overview of this critical reporting.
Thank you so much for that, because this executive order is just going to affect so many different people. So the more complexity we can add, the better. August 20th marked Southern HIV and AIDS Awareness Day. Darian, I will admit, here on This News is So Gay, I did not even know there was such a day. Can you talk to us about why such a day is important?
Ken, please don't feel bad about that. Trust me, you're not alone in being unaware of Southern HIV/AIDS Awareness Day. It's actually been around since 2019, but the day is extremely important, particularly in the South, because HIV is still an epidemic in this part of the country. We've seen tremendous progress, scientific progress, since the start of the HIV crisis, but the progress has not always trickled down into communities of color. As far as Black and Latino queer men are concerned, cis Black women and trans people of color are still heavily impacted by HIV in the South. According to AIDS VU in 2022, the US South accounted for a staggering 52% of all new HIV diagnoses, despite composing only 38% of the US population. And HIV stigma, I often refer to it as being more detrimental than the disease itself nowadays. It continues to be a barrier, restricting access to care and to preventative drugs like PrEP, which by 2024, only 23% of PrEP users in the South were Black. And that highlights a stark prevention gap. Part of my work at GLAAD is to tell dynamic stories about people living with HIV in the South. And my personal mission is to tell those stories from a cultural lens that is not rooted in trauma. And this is GLAAD's 40th year. And we were founded at the height of the HIV/AIDS crisis because our founders recognized that our stories were not being included, our voices were not being included in HIV coverage at that time. So while we rightfully celebrate all the progress that we've made, we must continue to use observance days like Southern HIV/AIDS Awareness Day to highlight the ongoing epidemic in the South. And it is an epidemic. HIV will not be eradicated across the board until it's first eradicated in the South.
And one of the aspects about living with HIV that we really don't talk nearly enough is growing old, getting older with HIV. Candice, you wrote about some of the Trump administration's CDC cuts that are threatening even the possibility of aging with HIV.
Right, I did. As we know, the Trump administration has made a variety of far reaching cuts, and that includes cuts to HIV staffing, funding for research, treatment, and prevention services. And so, one population particularly at risk with this is older adults. About 54% of people living with HIV in the United States are ages 50 and older, and that number is expected to grow to 70% by 2030. And so, two buckets of concern with this are that one, these populations will be overlooked because older people aren't typically the ones that are thought of in HIV prevention and treatment. Those kind of efforts tend to skew younger. And then two, people living with HIV as they get older can experience different comorbidities like high blood pressure, diabetes, bone frailty, heart disease at younger ages. So that's of concern, and advocates fear that these will all get worse during Trump's presidency. I also want to note that for this story, I interviewed a well known advocate, Ronald Johnson, who was diagnosed with HIV in 1989 when he thought he would have 1 to 2 years to live. And I ended up interviewing him on his 77th birthday. So I think that that speaks to how far we've come with HIV treatment and why advocates like Ronald want longevity for others.
It's such a great piece. Everybody has to check that out. And in some smile inducing HIV related news, one fundraiser that raises money for at risk populations and people living with HIV and AIDS is turning 30. Jason, tell us about Gay Bingo right there in Philadelphia. First, the most important question: have you been?
I've been many times. We love gay bingo in this household. It's super fun. And, Philadelphia has always had really strong activism supporting people living with HIV/AIDS. We've also had good support of local governments, especially in the 80s when federally we had basically nothing. So Gay Bingo started in 1996. It was created as a way to raise funds for people helping with people living with HIV/AIDS. It's run now by a group called Action Wellness, which affords a lot of different services to people living with HIV/AIDS, including housing assistance, medical coverage, after prison assistance. It supports pregnant people with HIV, emotional support. It has a buddy system. It gives free theater tickets. And so people attending Gay Bingo are supporting all of these things. And what it is it's a bingo game, 6 bingo games hosted by drag queens. And in between the games, the drag queens do a performance. And so it's a cross between a drag show and a bingo game. It's a lot of fun. They have different themes, really fun themes. I think the one that I went to last was a Lady Gaga theme. So all the drag queens had on these crazy sort of monster outfits, and they did a couple Lady Gaga songs. There's also a black tie bingo event that's happening later on, and that's a little more fancy, but the same spirit. We have 400 new HIV infections a year in Philly, and so it's still an issue. Rates in the Latino community are rising more than any other group, and so Gay Bingo, again, we need to support it, and anything people can do creatively to help raise funds, I think, is important in any cause, really, but especially in supporting people living with HIV/AIDS.
And especially as we see so many of these fundraisers going away, right? The 80s and the 90s had so many fundraisers, but we've seen so many of them just not take place anymore. So that one, Gay Bingo, is coming back on September 6th. I want to remind everyone that you are listening to This News is So Gay. I'm your host, Ken Schneck, from the Buckeye Flame, Ohio's LGBTQ plus newsroom. Joining me this week are Candice Norwood from the 19th, Darian Aaron from GLAAD, and Jason Villemez from the Philadelphia Gay News. Well, there are so many bans out there right now. What an umbrella for this next set of stories. Restrictions on LGBTQ public life are taking place all over the country. The one that I think got the most coverage this past week was the destruction of the Rainbow Crosswalk outside the Pulse Memorial in Florida, and the guerrilla protests that saw folks using chalk to repaint the rainbow. But I think in reading these stories, it was great images that really drew attention to it, is a much bigger issue in Florida than just the Pulse Memorial. I'm assuming, Darian, that we're counting Florida as in the South and thus in your region?
Yeah, absolutely. The removal of the crosswalk in front of the Pulse Memorial, in my opinion, is just another example of harmful anti-LGBTQ GOP policies. And in this case, the DeSantis administration's continued efforts to erase LGBTQ people from public life. This act is, I believe, particularly shameful because the Rainbow Crosswalk had been in place for 8 years already. It adhered to national safety standards and was installed to increase visibility, making it safer for a large number of visitors attending the Pulse Memorial to get there safely. By repainting the crosswalk in chalk, queer folks in Florida are sending a message to DeSantis and the GOP that we will not be erased, nor will the memory of the largest mass shooting at the time targeting LGBTQ people, where 49 beautiful souls lost their lives. I would encourage our listeners to log on to GLAAD.org and check out the GLAAD Accountability Project. You'll see our gap profile for Ron DeSantis and his administration. The removal of the rainbow crosswalk is just another laundry item on a long list of anti-LGBTQ actions that DeSantis has done targeting our community over the past few years. But we're not going anywhere. And folks in Florida are making that very clear.
And before folks write in and say, did you really not know Florida was in the South? Yes, I know that Florida's in the South, but there's so much going on there. I figured GLAAD has to have a staff member just for Florida. That's just more than enough for one person, Darian, and that's part of your whole portfolio.
Yeah, so true. But we don't have a designated staff member for Florida. We cover multiple states. I cover multiple states in the South, but I have to give a hat tip to my colleagues, Barbara Simon and Angela Delara, who do a lot of incredible, impactful work in the state of Florida.
We're going to talk about Barbara in a minute. There's a Barbara shout out coming up. That's a teaser for everybody. And for Barbara, who we know is a faithful listener of This News is So Gay. Well, another ban over in Texas, Candice. Apparently, we're not done talking about bathroom bans.
We are not. My colleague Kate Sossin reported last week that there's a new bill making its way through the Texas legislature that seeks once again to restrict trans people from using bathrooms in government buildings and public facilities. And so the bill labeled SB 8 is one of more than 16 anti-trans bathroom proposals filed in the Texas legislature in the past decade, according to Kate. And the bill institutes a $5,000 fine for a first offense and a $25,000 fine for a second offense. And SB 8 also touches on incarceration by preventing Texas prisons from housing trans detainees in facilities that correspond with their gender identity. This may be litigated in courts, but I also want to note that that particular statute about the prisons may violate the Federal Prison Rape Elimination Act, which requires prisons and jails to place trans people on a case-by-case basis in their housing inside prisons.
Texas is just keeping us on our toes every week. And in Pennsylvania, I must say at Swarthmore, which I will just share, I have a special place in my heart for Swarthmore. It was my first ever big comedy show that I ever put on was for Swarthmore students. It did not go well, but it got better as the night went on. Another ban that we're talking about, a lawsuit about a ban, Jason.
Yeah, my colleague Laura Norello reported on a trans woman, Evelyn Parts, who was a senior this past year at Swarthmore and captain of the track team. She's suing the college now after she was banned from participating for several months. So February 6th, the NCAA instituted a ban for women's sports on anyone born male at birth. And so they basically said that students assigned male at birth cannot compete with the team and left it at that, which is kind of funny because NCAA bylaws say that schools are subject to local, state, and federal laws, and such laws supersede NCAA policy. So we're going to get to that in a moment. So Swarthmore, when this law came out, this policy came out for the NCAA, they took 5 days to let Evelyn Parts know what to do. So she had written them and said, hey, this is concerning me. What should I do? In that 5 days, she missed a meet. She couldn't go to the meet. Swarthmore then told her basically that she could not compete with the women's team. She could compete unattached or she could compete in men's events. And she was off the team for 2 months. She participated in 2 meets unattached, which basically means you get no coaching, no transportation, you have to pay your own way. And she missed 3 meets. And so for those 2 months, she was in this state of limbo that anyone who's done college sports and enjoys it knows how much of a big deal it is. It's a part of your life. It's a part of your identity. It gives you joy, but it also teaches you lots of things about hard work ethic. And she wasn't able to do any of those things. And so she's suing the school. Delaware County, where Swarthmore is, has a local non-discrimination policy prohibiting discrimination on gender identity. Many counties in Pennsylvania do. And as the NCAA said, their policies do not go above local, state, or federal laws. And so the lawsuit basically says that, hey, this law was in place locally. You should not have done this.
Swarthmore. All right. We'll see how that progresses. Thank you all for those. Not so much for the bands. That's not good news all over the country. But let's pivot to some joy. This is the moment everyone's been waiting for, the longest contest of my life, I must say. Our weekly segment spotlighting queer joy in the news now has a name. First, I want to thank the very many entries we received, including those from listener Ari and listener Dr. Kristen, and even listener Barbara Simon from GLAAD, whose suggestion was beautifully sapphic, but a little horror related. And so I appreciated Barbara playing along, but that's not making the cut. Thanks, Barbara. The winning entry goes to listener TJ with his submission. Our new segment is called Glitter Bomb. A limited edition Buckeye Flame hoodie will make its way to you, TJ. Thank you for that. But for my colleagues, for Glitter Bomb, please share with me your favorite recent story of queer joy that you are seeing out there in the news. Darian, let's start with you. What queer joy are you seeing out there in the news?
Well, I feel special. Thank you for starting with me.
Happily.
Black queer theater is giving me joy. I recently had an opportunity to see A Strange Loop by Black queer playwright Michael R. Jackson, which was phenomenal. I was kind of late to the party. I was seeing it for the very first time. I missed the Broadway run, but it's running here in Atlanta at Actors Express through August 30th. And I had an opportunity to sit down with Michael R. Jackson to interview him the day after I saw the show. And our conversation revolved around many of the themes from the musical, religious-fueled homophobia, HIV stigma, and PrEP. Even. We had a very well-rounded conversation. The piece was published by LGBTQ Nation, so you can check it out there. I'm really, really proud of that piece. And being able to sit with Michael really gave me joy, and having that piece published.
Amazing. Amazing. Jason Villemez, where are you seeing queer joy out there?
I have two small tidbits that are related. So this past Sunday was Marsha P. Johnson's 80th birthday. I think we all need to give a little respect for her. A lot of people think that Marsha P. Johnson was at Stonewall, through the first brick at Stonewall. All these sort of things have been built up. Marsha P. Johnson is one of the most important trans people in history. Let's not take that away from her. She has said in an audio recording that she arrived at Stonewall around 2, 3 a.m. She wasn't there for the initial sort of hubbub. But my second part is the Stonewall National Monument Visitor Center, which just opened this past year. It's celebrating their 1-year anniversary. When we talk about the Trump administration removing LGBTQ things out of exhibits, removing the T from the website, the White House website on LGBTQ people, the Stonewall National Monument Visitor Center has all of that history unfiltered as it should be read. And so I just wanted to give them a little shout out. Hope they're all doing well. They're on vacation this week because that staff works really hard. So well-deserved rest. And they're open up next week to share our history with everybody.
Everybody access that history. Candice Norwood, where are you finding queer joy in the news?
This isn't the hardest hitting news, but as someone who loves movies and likes to escape in some ways by watching a good movie or a television show, I'm kind of excited by some of the sapphic related movies that have been coming out lately. There's a movie that came out a few days ago, Honey Don't, with Aubrey Plaza and Margaret Qualley. Another movie that's scheduled to come out in October with Tessa Thompson called Hedda. I haven't seen Honey Don't yet, so if you hate it, don't tag me. But I am just excited that there are still efforts being made to showcase sapphic love stories in particular in fun and interesting ways.
We got it. We're going to go see those movies. And finally, congratulations to Blaze Sheik and Louis Kahn and the entire Minnesota Vikings franchise, who are standing strong with their 2 male cheerleaders, despite some internet trolls having a field day. Blaze and Louis will remain out there pumping up the crowds. So for our final quick hit question for our panelists, what I need from you all, what is your favorite tune to pump you up and get you going? Jason Villemez, let's start with you. What tune gets you going?
Whitney Houston, How Will I Know? I've been dancing to that since I was 1 year old. It came out when I was 1 year old. I've been dancing to it ever since. Always gets me happy, always gets me going. I love some Whitney.
Amazing. Candice Norwood, what tune gets you going?
It's not a single tune, but I've been revisiting Janelle Monáe's Age of Pleasure album. That's been really doing it for me lately. So I'm going to go with that entire album.
The way that I think I can do dances from Tightrope that I can't do, it's really quite impressive. I just want to put that out there to folks. And this is why we're an audio-only podcast. And finally, Darian, Aaron, what tune pumps you up?
Like Candice, it's not a single tune, but anyone who knows me knows I am the biggest Janet Jackson fan on the planet. So any of Janet's music, probably from the Janet album, 1993, my very favorite Janet recording.
I do want to remind our listeners that, again, the correct answer this week was Wilson Phillips, but I appreciate everyone providing their feedback. I want to hear what you all are working on. Jason Villemez, tell everybody what you're working on.
So the Philadelphia Gay News is celebrating its 50th anniversary in March. I've got a bunch of stories on that. Just finished a piece recently tracking the advertising in PGN through 50 years. Found some really interesting things. So, of course, the ads started local businesses, local organizations. National ads came in the 80s and then really hit the 90s. One really interesting note that I want to bring up is in 1987, Joe DeSabato, who ran the national ad service for PGN, wrote a scathing op-ed to the condom companies because he and his team had worked for 5 years to try and get condom companies to advertise in local gay media. And they were advertising at the time in Women's Wear Daily, Marie Claire, Ebony, Essence, the New York Times, local TV. They were not advertising in gay media. And so he actually encouraged people, I'm not kidding, to send their empty condom wrappers to the national offices of Trojan and Lifestyles with the addresses and the executives attached. 3 months later, PGN got an advertisement from Lifestyles about using their condoms. So just want to shout out that sometimes you got to shame corporations into doing what's right.
Not mad about that. Darian, Aaron, Darian, before you tell us what you're working on, I have to give you a little shout out, folks. And I love shouting out other podcasts and wonderful things happening. People should all listen to Hella Black, Hella Queer, Hella Christian. I enjoyed your chat on that show so much.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. And thank you for shouting out that podcast with host Joseph Reeves. It's a new podcast, and he is really doing his thing in the podcasting space, being inclusive of Black queer folks who are also Christian. So thank you for that.
Tell us what you're working on, sir.
So I am working on Generation Z and HIV. Human Issue, Southern Solution, and HBCU Tour. This is something that we're doing in partnership with GLAAD, where we're taking HIV knowledge to HBCU campuses across the South. We're going to kick off at Jackson State University at the end of October. We're really trying to close the HIV knowledge gap with Gen Z, and we're doing so in a fun and interactive way.
Amazing. Candice Norwood. So what exhausts me about you, Candice Norwood, and why I adore you, because your writing, I love that you have to keep going back and writing pieces, updating people on where certain laws stand. That feels exhausting, Candice Norwood, and I'm just reading it. For you, it just changes constantly, does it not?
Yeah, I mean it's a hard part of this work, especially being a small newsroom covering the entire country, but we try to do our best, and I think we're doing well so far.
You are doing the thing. Tell us what you're working on.
Yes, so I live in Washington, D.C., which many people may know is experiencing a lot of tension right now with the Trump administration expanding military presence and policing presence in the city. And a lot of the work being done locally in terms of criminal justice related reform is happening because of Black women and Black queer people here in DC. And so I'm trying to speak with a number of those groups and get a sense of how these various Trump efforts, the latest today being that Trump is trying to get rid of cashless bail, how that's all affecting families and youth in the city in particular.
Amazing, amazing stuff. We will, of course, be reading it. And that's all the time that we have for this week. I want to thank this week's roundtable, Candice Norwood from the 19th, Darian Aaron from GLAAD, and Jason Villemez from the Philadelphia Gay News. Thank you all so much for joining me this week. I'm Ken Schneck, editor of the Buckeye Flame. If you liked this episode of This News is So Gay, please share it with a friend, rate and review it on your favorite podcasting app, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on our next episode. In the meantime, read LGBTQ+ news, share the stories of LGBTQ+ reporters, and support the work of LGBTQ+ newsrooms. Until next week, friends.